The Gold Bug by Edgar Allan Poe. Part 1. In the Warmth of the Fire. After a series of misfortunes reduced his once wealthy family to near poverty, William Legrand left his native city of New Orleans, Louisiana. He was depressed and discouraged, too ashamed of his misfortunes to face old friends. With one companion, Legrand came to live on Sullivan's Island, near Charleston, South Carolina. His single companion was Jupiter, an elderly slave who had been given his freedom before the loss of the family fortune. Because of his concern for his former master and because he was too old to enter a new occupation, Jupiter had decided to accompany Legrand and look after him. Sullivan's Island is about 3 miles long and 1/4 of a mile wide. A narrow creek oozes its way through weeds and slime along one long side and separates the island from the South Carolina mainland. The opposite side of the island faces the sea. Because the sea is almost all sand, there are few trees or plants. At the western end of the island is Fort Moultrie, and here, amid several small summer cottages, stand a few clusters of the bristly palmetto, a small palm tree with fan-shaped leaves. The rest of the island is covered with sweet myrtle, a shrub which fills the air with its fragrance and manages somehow to grow quite thick and quite tall, sometimes 15 or 20 feet. Legrand and Jupiter had built a small hut in the midst of this tall, thick shrubbery at the eastern end of the island. I was living in Charleston at the time, but my love of nature often took me across the creek to the island. Although Legrand was called by some a hermit, we had met during one of my visits and became friends. He had an unusually keen mind and was very well educated. He was, though, a strangely moody person who could jump with enthusiasm at one moment and become silent and melancholy the next. This was due, I always supposed, to the changes in his family's fortune. But he seemed to look forward to my occasional visits to his hut, and I enjoyed his company. Others might have thought his existence an isolated one, but Legrand actually kept quite busy. His chief amusements were hunting and fishing, or walking along the beach and through the myrtles, searching for shells and insect specimens. He had quite a fine collection of both, and was very knowledgeable about the entomology of the study of insect life. One October day, a few years ago, 1840 I think it was, I decided to visit my friend, whom I had not seen in several weeks. Usually the weather on Sullivan's Island is quite mild even in the winter. In the autumn it is seldom necessary to light a fire, but this day was quite chilly. Just before sunset I reached the hut. I rapped, as I usually did, but there was no reply. I knew where the key was hidden, so I unlocked the door and went in. A fine fire was blazing upon the hearth, a most welcome sight, although an unusual one here. I sat down gratefully in an armchair near the crackling logs, and in a little while my hosts arrived. They greeted me cordially, and Jupiter, grinning from ear to ear, bustled about to prepare supper. Legrand was in one of his moods of enthusiasm. He had found a new king of shell, even more exciting, a scarab, a kind of black-winged beetle once considered sacred by the ancient Egyptians. I believed this scarab to be totally new, never described by any scientist before. He shouted joyfully, "And I hope to have your opinion about it tomorrow." "And why not tonight?" I inquired, rubbing my hands over the blaze. "If only I knew you were coming," answered Legrand. "But it's been so long since I've seen you. How could I have guessed that you would visit me this very night? On the way home I met Lieutenant Gray from Fort Moultrie. You know how interested he is in the natural science. Foolishly I lent him the bug, so it will be impossible for you to see it until morning. Stay here tonight, and I will send Jupiter for it at sunrise. It is the loveliest thing in creation." "What is the loveliest? The sunrise?" "No, the bug, of course. It's a brilliant gold color, about the size of a large hickory nut. It has 2 jet black spots at one end of its back, and a single long black spot at the other end. The antennae are—" "It's a gold bug, Mr. Will," cut in Jupiter. "Solid gold, every bit of 'em, inside and all, 'cept the wing. I never felt such a heavy bug in my life." "Well, I suppose it is, Jupe," returned Legrand. "Is that any reason for letting our dinner burn? The color." Here he returned to me. "The color is really close to Jupiter's description. The scales have the most brilliant metallic shine. You see for yourself tomorrow. In the meantime, This will give you some ideas of the shape." Saying this, he sat down at a small table. On it were pen and ink, but no paper. He hunted in his pockets until he found what looked like a scrap of dirty notepaper. "Never mind," he said. "I'll use this." And on the notepaper, he made a rough drawing with his pen. When he had finished sketching, he handed it to me without rising. I returned to my seat by the fire, for I was still chilled after my long walk. As I took the drawing, I heard a loud growl and the sound of scratching at the door. Jupiter went to open it, and a large dog rushed in. This was Wolf, Legrand's Newfoundland, to whom I had given much attention on my earlier visits. The dog now leaped upon my shoulders and loaded me with caresses. After Wolf and I frolicked a bit, I turned my attention to Legrand's drawing. To tell the truth, I was quite puzzled at what I saw. "Well?" "Well," I exclaimed after studying the paper for some minutes. "This is a strange scarab, I agree. I never saw anything like it before. Unless it was a death's head. A skull, that's what it looks like to me." "A death's head!" repeated Legrand in surprise. "Oh, yes, well, I guess it does look something like that on paper. The two upper black spots look like eyes, eh? And the longer one on the bottom like a mouth, and then the shape of the whole is oval." "Perhaps so," I said. "But, Legrand, I can see you are not an artist. I'll just have to wait to see the beetle itself." "Not an artist?" he repeated. "I always thought I could draw fairly well." He was clearly offended. "I had some good teachers at one time." "But you must be joking then," I said. "This is a very fine drawing of a skull. Your beetle must be the queerest scarab in the world to resemble it. But where are the antennae you spoke of?" "The antenna!" Legrand was all but shouting now. "You must see the antenna. I drew them quite distinctively." "Perhaps so," I said as soothingly as I could. "Perhaps you have, but I still don't see them." Without further comment, I handed him the paper. I was quite surprised at his change of mood. And as for the drawing of the beetle, there was positively no antenna, and the thing did look very like a death's head. He took the paper with a look of annoyance, and was about to crumple it up and throw it into the fire, when a quick glance at the design seemed to startle him. His face grew red. Then he turned quite pale. Sitting quite still at the table, he studied the drawing carefully. Then he stood up, and taking a candle from the table, went to sit down upon a sea chest in the farthest corner of the room. Here again he studied the paper carefully, turning it in all directions. However, he didn't say a word. I was quite amazed at his behavior, but thought it best not to risk irritating him any further. So I remained silent also. Presently he took a wallet from his pocket and placed the paper carefully in it. He unlocked a writing desk and placed the wallet inside, locking it again. Now he grew calmer, but the enthusiasm he had shown earlier in the evening was gone. As the evening wore on, he became more and more absorbed in his own thoughts, and no conversation of mine could arouse him. I had planned to spend the night at the hut, as I had often done before, but because of Legrand's mood I decided to leave. He did not insist on me staying, but as I left he shook my hand with what seemed to me to be a highly emotional grip. For the next month I did not see Legrand. Then one day Jupiter appeared at my home in Charleston. He looked so downcast that I feared some serious disaster had occurred. "Welcome, Jupe," I said. "But what is the matter? How is Mr. Will?" "To tell the truth, sir, he's not too well. Not too well at all." "Not well? I'm sorry to hear it. What does he complain of?" "There, that's it," exclaimed Jupiter. "He never complains of a thing, but I can tell he's very sick." "Very sick, Jupiter? Why don't you say so at once?" "Why, sir, it's nothing to get excited about. Mr. Will says nothing the matter with him. But then, why does he walk about with his head down and his shoulders up and his face as white as a ghost? Jupiter, haven't you any idea what is causing this? Has anything unpleasant happened since I saw you?" "No, sir. Hasn't been anything unpleasant since then. It was before then, and it was the very day you were there." "How? What do you mean?" "Why, sir, I mean the bug. The gold bug he found. I never did see such a devilish bug. It kicked and bit everything that come near it. Mr. Will caught it first, but he had to let it go again, mighty quick. I tell you, that was when he must have got bitten. I didn't like the look of the bug's mouth myself, to tell the truth, so I wouldn't grab him with my fingers. It Instead, I caught a hold of him with a piece of paper that I found. I wrapped him up in the paper and stuffed a piece of it in his mouth. And you really think that Mr. Will was bitten by the beetle, and that the bite made him sick? I don't think nothing about it. I know it, Jupiter answered emphatically. Why else do he dream about the gold so much? If it ain't because he was bit by the gold bug. I've heard about gold bugs before. How do you know he dreams about gold? How? Because he talks about it in his sleep. That's how. Well, Jupe, perhaps you're right. But about your coming here today, did you bring any message for me? Not a message, sir. I brought this letter. And here Jupiter handed me this note. My dear friend, since I saw you, I have had a great cause for anxiety. I have something to tell you. Yet I don't know how to tell it, or even whether I should tell it at all. I have not been quite well for some days past. I know poor old Jupe worries about me. I have not found anything new for my collection since you were here. If you possibly can, come back with Jupiter. Do come. I wish to see you tonight, upon business of the highest importance. Ever yours, William Legrand. The tone of this note made me very uneasy. It was so different from Legrand's usual style. What business of the highest importance could he possibly have with me? Jupiter's description of his condition worried me too. I was afraid that his misfortunes had finally unsettled his sanity. Without a moment's hesitation, therefore, I prepared to go back to the island with Jupiter. I agreed to meet him at the wharf in a short while. A scythe and 3 spades, all new, were lying in the bottom of the boat when I reached the wharf. What are these for, Jupiter? I asked. Mr. Will insisted I buy them in the town, and a lot of money I had to pay for them too. But what is he going to do with them? That's more than I know, Jupiter replied, but it's all because of that bug. It was clear that I was not going to get any information or satisfaction from Jupiter, for his mind seemed completely absorbed by the bug. So I stepped into the boat, and we set sail. With a strong breeze, we soon landed just north of Fort Montier on Sullivan's Island. A walk of some 2 miles brought us to the hut at about 3 in the afternoon. Legrand was eagerly waiting for us.